Hello, everybody. Welcome to NEA's National Energy Actions webinar on our annual Fuel Poverty Monitor report, The Energy Crisis 2 Years In, Urgent Priorities for Fuel Poverty Policy. We're just waiting for a few more people to join us, but I'll give you, unless you've met us before, a little bit of background to National Energy Action. We're the fuel poverty charity that campaigns to ensure that everybody can live in a warm, safe and healthy home. Sadly, this is something that we know is denied to millions of people at the moment because of poor housing, low incomes and sky-high energy bills. As some of you will have already guessed, I'm not Adam Scorer. My name's Peter Smith. I'm Director of Policy and Advocacy at the charity National Energy Action. Adam isn't able to join us today, but I'm going to be chairing today's session, and I hope you find it really useful for your own work. I should say that although not represented today in the agenda, this is a joint publication alongside our sister organisation Energy Action Scotland. We've published the Fuel Poverty Monitor for over 2 years to investigate the scale and range of issues affecting efforts to end fuel poverty across each of the UK nations. Sadly, with over 6.5 million UK households in fuel poverty this winter, that challenge has never been more acute and our findings never more urgent. The specific aim of today is to provide an opportunity for you all to hear about our report. And following today's event, crucially, we want as many of you as possible to feel that the insight and conclusions that are drawn out in our analysis are relevant to your own work. And we really welcome the ongoing work that you're doing at this crucial time to help tackle fuel poverty. We also hope that, as well as old friends, that we're engaging new audiences in the need to tackle fuel poverty and underlining the huge benefits that creates as a society. Just a couple of specific aims of our research. I mentioned it's a vital time, and it's also a vital time to keep the pressure up on offsetting the worst impacts of this energy crisis, which has been going for 2 years, and crucially to meet our fuel poverty target in England, which is a legal target, statutory target. Next month, we'll hear updated fuel poverty statistics, which are likely to continue to illustrate the scale of meeting that challenge. And our analysis adds to that overwhelming sense that not enough currently is being done to offset the worst impacts of this energy crisis or meet those legal obligations. So we hope by sharing this research, we can help you in terms of challenging our policymakers and other actors to do far more to meet those legal aims. We also highlight the huge role of energy efficiency-based targets. And in particular, we hope to use this research to influence the other devolved nations to introduce minimum energy efficiency targets for fuel poor households in a very welcome way that the UK government has done in England. Most of all, we hope to underline the huge and varied benefits that there are to tackle fuel poverty, and underline the need for many different parties to help support efforts to tackle fuel poverty. Whilst this research in today's session will underline the crucial role of central investment to meet those legal aims, we also really want to stress the need for landlords, and in particular private landlords, to help offset the worst impacts of fuel poverty on behalf of their tenants, and the huge benefits that can accrue to them if they join us in that endeavour. All of that, we hope, will be useful in terms of the build-up to what will be an election year. And we'll use the evidence and analysis that we're presenting to you today, hopefully alongside many of you, to help take forward compelling arguments to all political parties about the need to end fuel poverty and the huge benefits that can come with it. I should say, before I introduce our panel and we get into the meat of today's session, just a bit of housekeeping. I think, first of all, just to say, if you're frantically pressing the refresh button on our website, our report will be published straight away after this session, and you should be able to receive a copy of the full report as well as the executive summary. We expect the session to be finished no later than 5 o'clock, otherwise I'll have massively failed as a chair. But if you are unable to stay until the end, we will be hosting a copy of this video on our YouTube channel. And we've perhaps got a few people joining us live through our live stream on the YouTube channel at the moment. We are, due to strong interest in today, hosting this as a Zoom webinar. If you're used to webinars, you'll notice that some of the functionality that you would usually see isn't there. First of all, we can't see or hear you, so apologies for that. It would be lovely to gaze into all of your eyes, but we can't do that. But importantly, that the chat function that you would usually see is muted, and that we will be taking questions through the Q&A function. And hopefully we've allocated enough time for questions. There's 15 minutes for questions in the agenda. But if we aren't able to reach to get to all of your questions, then we will try and contact you after the event and follow up with any queries that you might have had. Finally, I want to stress that if you are able and you're a keen tweeter, or Xer as it's probably now called, then you can please do copy us into your tweets. You can follow us at NEA capitals _ capitals UK charity sorry, I say that again, at NEA uppercase _ UK uppercase charity. Finally, waiting patiently in the wings, I just want to quickly introduce our panel. You'll be pleased to know that I'm not going to be the only person speaking today. First of all, and crucially, we have Anna Quincy joining us, who was the lead analyst at GemServe, who undertook a huge amount of the hard work to illustrate the costs of meeting the remaining fuel poverty target in England, and the costs of setting out that approach across the other UK nations, and crucially worked with us to fully capture many of the benefits that are associated with tackling fuel poverty and monetising them. She's going to take you through for about 15 minutes their key findings, which are featured in our UK Fuel Poverty Monitor report. We're also joined by NEA's own Matt Copeland, our Head of Policy and Public Affairs, who's going to talk to you about the key findings in our report and our conclusions and our recommendations. And I'm very grateful to be joined by Josh Buckland, Senior Partner at Flint Global, and Donald Brown, Director of UK Programmes at Ashton, to provide us with their hot takes on our research and its relevance to their work, but also your own. And then finally, as I said, we've set aside plenty of time for Q&A. So we'll be able to look at those questions as and when they come in. So please, right from the get-go, please start asking any questions that you might have, and we'll try and answer as many of them as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Anna to take the stage and present to us her key analysis that has informed our UK Fuel Poverty Monitor.
Great, thanks, Peter. Bear with me while I share my slides. All right, hopefully that's coming through for everyone.
Yeah, I can see that clearly, thank you.
Perfect. All right, so thanks for the introduction. A quick look at what I'll go through today. So some introductions to me and GemServe, then an overview of the work that we've done with NEA, a look at the approach we've taken and the wider metrics that we've looked at, then running through results for fuel poverty for England, metrics around meeting the fuel poverty target for England, then broadening out to devolved nations, looking at differences between tenures for each nation, touching on the benefits case for England, and then summarising with some concluding remarks. So firstly, a bit about GemServe and myself. So GemServe, we're a professional services company and working across different spaces. So energy, cyber, digital, and low carbon is the place where I sit. So I'm part of the analysis team in the low carbon business unit. And in my time at GemServe, I've worked on 3 other fuel poverty projects, And over the course of those have developed and refined a household level model, which forms the basis for the analysis that I'll be presenting today. An overview of this work. So working to quantify the value of addressing fuel poverty in the UK. So as Peter mentioned, both looking at the costs, but also the benefits case of meeting the fuel poverty targets. And going about that by modelling energy efficiency upgrades, firstly for fuel poor homes in England, looking at impacts on fuel poverty rates and energy bills, and looking at the funding gap for meeting the target. So the fuel poverty target for England being that fuel poor homes are brought out of fuel poverty by 2030 for all that is reasonably practicable to do so. Then the next stage, looking at wider metrics for each scenario. So 4 categories there, looking at benefits to the economy, to individuals, landlords, and the environment. And then finally, also doing extrapolated results to devolved UK nations. A bit more of a look at the approach. So we've got household level data forming the basis for the analysis. So that's based on the English Housing Survey. Then we go through with various additional data points and assumptions. So fuel prices, heating systems, fabric efficiency changes, running through calculations, and these are based on the official fuel poverty methodology for England. Through to results, so looking at impact on households and quantifying that funding gap between meeting the target. Then the process of extrapolation to wider nations, and also those cost-benefit metrics. And a bit more of an overview of what those metrics include. So the ones that we've looked to quantify here, so some of these are monetary, some of them are other forms of quantification, but these are the ones that we've focused on. So on the economic side of things, we've looked at economic growth using gross value added. That's as associated with installed measures. Looking at social return on investment, jobs and skills. So again, number of jobs supported by those measures installed, and increased energy security. So reduced imports that are allowed by reducing energy consumption. On the individual level, looking at reduced energy use, bill savings, reduced energy rationing, and the value of increased comfort to those households. Landlord, looking at the increased capital value of properties, that's private rented properties. And finally, environmentally, looking at carbon savings, primary energy savings, outdoor air quality, and reduced cost of decarbonisation. So costs that are avoided as a result of reducing carbon in this place compared to other options that would need to contribute to the decarbonisation of the UK. Great. So moving on to our results for fuel poverty in England. So yeah, firstly, just looking at those fuel poverty numbers. And starting off here with the current official statistics for 2022 stands at 3.26 million for the number of fuel poor homes in England. As our process, we've looked at what the state will be like in 2030. So the first step is to do sort of convert the current state to what happens if no energy efficiency measures are done from 2022. And our estimate there comes out at 3.4 million. If upgrades are done as aligned with current funding, then that brings that number down slightly. But as you can see, very little change from the current state. And that's our sort of business as usual scenario. A couple of things to mention here that are feeding into these numbers is those heating system transitions that we've modelled. So as aligned with the CCC's balanced pathway to net zero, we model heating system changes and then also the fuel prices used as well. Another thing to note on the current funding here, so that's funding that we consider to have a high level of certainty. So that's currently allocated or announced funding, but that doesn't include, say, assuming automatic renewal of current policies past when they're currently announced for. Moving on to results for meeting the fuel poverty target. So firstly, looking at the scenarios that we're considering. So as mentioned previously, so our business as usual scenario is looking at energy efficiency upgrades that are done to fuel poor homes, but only to the degree under current funding allocations. And then we have our target met scenario looking at energy efficiency upgrades that allow 90% of fuel poor homes to meet the fuel poverty target via energy efficiency upgrades, and the final 10% would meet the target via ongoing fuel support. So a couple of notes on this scenario, a reasoning behind the 90% here. So we found that the data sources that we were using had a higher uncertainty of costs beyond £24,000. So that's that final 10% of homes are the costs, are those that would cost more than that to upgrade. So that higher uncertainty and costs being a lot higher was why we chose that 90% value. But ongoing fuel bill support still allows those homes to meet the fuel poverty target in this scenario. Not saying that that's a sort of ideal scenario, but that's the one that we've modelled in this case. So a look at the numbers in that business as usual scenario. So we highlight a 2.6 billion amount of funding that's currently allocated for measures in fuel poor homes. And key to note that's just the amount of money that goes towards measures in fuel poor homes, rather than the total amount associated with the policy. And our analysis comes out that to upgrade those 90% of homes would cost 20 billion. And again, that's the cost of upgrade measures in those fuel poor homes, which leads to an 18 billion funding gap for measures costs. A couple of things I've drawn out here. So we're looking at fuel poor homes only. So those of you familiar with policies around this will be aware that out of the funding that is spent, only a proportion of this will reach fuel poor homes. So that's targeting issues around policies, or will impact how much funding reaches fuel poor homes. Also, that we're looking at measures costs only. So additional costs would be the upgrades to homes that aren't fuel poor, so that indirect targeting, there would be costs associated there as well, and also additional costs associated with policies, administrative costs and that sort of thing. And a note on those things is that that's the sort of frame that we've chosen, but if you expanded that frame, say, to the homes that are on the borderlines of fuel poverty, then you would also expand the benefits case as well, so that indirect targeting isn't necessarily a problem because you're solving other issues for homes. So hopefully that makes sense. And a couple of other numbers here. So that ongoing fuel bill support in this scenario would come to 0.7 billion each year from 2030. And then also a note on the benefits side. So the total change in annual fuel bills from that business as usual to the target scenario comes to 1.5 billion. So moving on to our results for devolved nations. So I've summarised the funding gaps here. Again, we see that these are significant across the nations. And a couple of notes. So we're assuming that a similar level of energy efficiency is reached as meeting the fuel poverty target in England. So acknowledging that actually different nations have different fuel poverty targets or definitions, but we're using that basis of a similar level of energy efficiency here. And also to note that we're using higher level methodologies than for England, for which we had our in-depth model to base the numbers off. Moving on to 10-year differences. So as Peter mentioned at the beginning, there could be contributions from landlords towards this upgrade cost. And looking at the split across England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, we see particularly for England that rented sector being a high proportion of the total upgrade costs. So we could expect private social landlords to pick up a significant proportion of costs. Looking at the benefits case, finally. So out of those that we've quantified, the benefits case is significant. So we've got cumulative benefits here up to 2030, which comes to 33 billion compared to that 18 billion difference between current allocated funding and what happens meeting the target. A few things to pull out here. So 5 billion of that 33 billion is direct energy bill savings. Other contributors to that benefits figure, the highest one is air quality damage savings, which comes to 15 billion. That's then followed by the gross value added from installations, energy bill savings, and then capital value of private rented properties. So those are the most significant contributors to that 33 billion. So just some concluding remarks then, things to pull out from what we found. Firstly, the upgrading that final hardest to treat 10% could increase costs significantly, but would also lead to greater benefits. And I suppose another important thing to think about here is that actually this funding or this money isn't just going to the fuel poverty agenda, but upgrading homes has wider impacts. So other government agendas like meeting net zero and health, air quality impacts. So actually the benefits are wide ranging, and that's important context to think about. Secondly, looking at landlord contributions. So yeah, they could bear a good proportion of upgrade costs, particularly for England. And then finally, that cumulative benefits could far outweigh costs, even when we only consider them up to 2030. And that's all I have for the moment. So thank you for listening.
Brilliant, Anna. Thank you very much for taking us through what is a very complicated piece of analysis in such clear and concise way. And thanks very much to GemServe as well for the role that you've played to support that analysis generally. Been a first-class partner, and we're hoping to work with you more in the future. Now, I'm going to turn to my colleague, Matt Copeland, who's going to take you through the bits that we've taken out of GemServe's analysis and put into our own research. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Peter. And I'll just reiterate how excellent GemServe have been to work with. I know that some people have been having trouble seeing the slides. I've just checked and it's all working on YouTube. So if Zoom isn't working for you, perhaps head over to the live stream on YouTube and you'll be able to see everything working perfectly. And I'm sure Brian can send over the link to make sure that you've got all of that, because I will be again using just a few slides to give a bit of a visual aid to what I'm saying. First thing I'll say though is it's so exciting to share this research that we've been working on for quite a while now, and very exciting always to see such a big number next to the participants' little logo. Fantastic to have such big interest in the work that we're doing and such an important topic. I'm going to talk about a bit more about what this report's trying to do. So reiterate some of the stuff that Peter's already said. bit about our approach, how we've gone about it. I'll jump forward to the conclusions that we've been able to make at the back end of that approach, and then some of our recommendations. So, as Peter said, we do the monitor every year. It considers different things in different years, the hot topics, COVID, energy crisis, decarbonisation of heat. And this year, it considers the ongoing impact of the energy crisis, and particularly the impact of the crisis on progress towards meeting fuel poverty targets across the 4 nations of the UK. And we go on to highlight the sorts of priorities that should be there for an reinvigorated approach to end fuel poverty, and how we can achieve the best benefits, the greatest benefits. There's societal benefits, economic benefits, environmental benefits, and beyond that really as well. To do that, we've conducted primary and secondary research across a number of different channels really. We put out a call for evidence last summer, which I'm sure many of you on this webinar did respond to. We've got 136 respondents, and you told us all about what you thought about the strategies across the UK, whether we're going to meet fuel poverty targets in different nations or not, how the current schemes are working. We talked to our clients. We asked our clients what their experience of living in fuel poverty has been, what their experience of accessing schemes has been, and we've put their case studies in the report. So throughout the report, you'll see the real stories of our clients throughout. Anna has already talked about GemServe's first of a kind research on the benefits of meeting the targets. And this is the most consequential bit of research, I think, in terms of forming some of the really sort of quantitative recommendations we're able to come up with. And in the report as well, you'll see the results of some polling we've done across the whole of the UK, I think, to understand how the crisis is continuing to impact people and the lengths that people are going to stay warm at home and to reduce their energy bills. And that work led us to make 3 sets of conclusions. The first one is that when the policies that are available, those schemes, when they work well, the impact that they have on the households that are receiving support is profound. And we've heard from our clients that when they do receive measures to upgrade their homes, they're warmer, they're paying less for their energy, they're healthier. We know that jobs are created by those schemes as well. And actually, the benefits are clear. And since 2010, those sorts of schemes have led to a significant increase in the number of households that meet that acceptable level of EPCC. And in England, that's 50% of all households. And our case studies show that when particularly vulnerable households are able to access support, the benefits can be completely life-changing. I would encourage you to go into the exec summary, which holds all of the case studies on a single page. I think it's a really notable page in the report. The second conclusion is that the strategies that we have in each of the nations fail to meet the scale of the challenge at this point in time. And you'll see that 70% of our respondents in England told us they weren't going to meet the target. 50% said in Wales we're unlikely to meet the target, and 1 in 3 in Scotland said we're not going to meet the target. And it decreases there in line with how much further in time the target is away. But the general consensus from respondents was that we're unlikely to meet the targets in each of the nations, and that was a real concern that was coming through. So I'll come on to what that means in terms of what we think needs to be done in a minute. But really key output of our report is that actually the route that we're on, and as Anna's just presented, the route that we're on doesn't get us to where we need to be. But as Anna's already said, we know if we did get there, it's not just about cost, it's about benefit. And there are really, really significant benefits to doing this. Anna's picked out a few really key ones in her slide. I just wanted to pick out some of the ones that really stood out to me. So one, the bill savings, which Anna also picked out, £5 billion cumulative. That's a huge number. That's like 12 warm home discount schemes in scale. It's a massive amount of savings for the most vulnerable households. I picked out carbon emissions, so 8,000 tons of CO2 in that period. And I looked it up, and that's like a small developing country, like taking a whole country and taking the carbon emissions completely out of that country, similar to just meeting the fuel poverty target. And the employment impact just in England, 22,000 full-time jobs. That's the equivalent of another national grid just popping up. So really, really significant impacts for the individual, for our carbon targets, and for society. So what does that lead us to recommend? Again, we like threes at the moment. There's three key recommendations that we have in our report. The first one is the need for new, more ambitious cross-departmental fuel poverty strategies, which are desperately needed in light of the current crisis. So we need to update our plans to reduce and eradicate fuel poverty because there's a new context that we're sitting in. More ambitious because we're behind the curve. Cross-departmental because the benefits span different departments. We have health benefits. We've got clear benefits to the Treasury. We've got clear benefits to landlords. Environmental benefits. If we don't have that cross-departmental approach to this, then it's less likely that we'll be able to access all of those benefits in a structured way. That more ambitious part of the strategy needs to be supported by spending. Anna has set out the total cost of upgrading those homes. And we think that we can translate that into sort of a projected needed spend to meet the target. This is based on that the modelling that GemServe has done. So it's that looking up to the costs that include that 24K cost cap that GemServe have had to put in place because of the limitations of the data. I'm not saying that we believe that should be the exact cost cap and is a definition of what sort of reasonable is in terms of practicable, but that's what we've done in the modelling, and that leads to the following. And I'll caveat this as well, that the following includes a reduction in cost to the Treasury because we assume certain contributions from both private and social landlords, which I'll get onto in a second. But the amount of funding we think is needed is about £2 billion per year in England, £200 million a year in Wales, 340 million quid a year in Scotland, and £60 million a year in Northern Ireland. Now, that is those are big numbers compared to what's currently being spent. But we're in the context of being in the year of an election, and there are opportunities for political parties to hopefully look at this and think there's a huge opportunity there to access these massive benefits, to get ahead of the curve again, and actually to go out there and get the mandate from society to go and do this. And actually, some polling we've recently done shows that the public really support giving low-income households grants to upgrade their homes. So it's a popular thing. And then the last recommendation is to urgently raise the level of energy efficiency in the worst privately rented homes. And it really is all rented homes is followed on from this recommendation, because the sub-recommendation is that all nations should require landlords, whether private or social, to make sure that their properties reach EPC-C by 2030. Now, of course, there's going to be cost caps involved in this. I think we assume that landlords meet about between a half and 2/3 of the costs, depending on what country it's in, because there's different policies being discussed in different countries. But doing that reduces the cost to the Treasury of meeting the fuel poverty target in different nations quite significantly, and therefore increases the total sort of GVA to government of doing this. And as Anna said, it's not as if landlords, it's just a cost to them. There is a benefit. We've quantified the benefit to landlords with GemServe as being the increased value of their property. So, increased equity for those landlords. But there's other things as well that we've considered in the report, but not monetized, such as reduced damp and mold in the property, and increased propensity of people to afford to pay their rents. So that, in a snapshot, is what our report says. There's, I've tried to condense a 40-page report into 10 minutes there, which means I've lost some of the detail, but hopefully I've got the main points there. But I've got 3 messages that I hope we can all take home. Report. One is that energy efficiency makes a difference to individuals, the economy, and the environment in both a personal and a macro way. 2, we're very clearly off track to meeting the statutory target that we have in England and an equivalent target in the other nations. But 3, we can find our way back. The cost is achievable, especially in an election year, but it needs a commitment ahead of the election. And if we do it, we can access huge benefits for society. That's all from me. I'll hand over to Peter to continue the procession around us speakers.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matt. That was really comprehensive. And again, thanks for being so concise in terms of synthesizing what is a huge, well, it's not a huge report, but a very meaty subject area. So we have a couple of questions, but before we get to them, I mentioned earlier that we've got Josh Buckland and Donald Brown here to provide their hot takes on our report and our key findings and recommendations. I think Josh and Donald will hopefully be known to some of you, but they've been providing us with a great steer throughout this research, just in terms of its scope and also on some of the key findings and how to land them. I'm going to start with Josh. Josh, we've obviously heard quite some fairly shocking analysis. 3 million households in fuel poverty by 2030 if we don't do anything, losing out on average on £480 per year from not meeting that target, and also the crucial importance of landlords coming to the party and helping central government in co-funding this investment on the fuel poor's behalf. Can I just ask you just to give us your reflections on our analysis and what you think it tells us, and anything that you would pull out as being particularly of interest?
Thanks, Peter, and first, kind of thanks to you and obviously NEA and those who have contributed, as well as obviously GemServe, because the kind of quality and depth of analysis is clear, and the amount of work that's gone in, including those for the kind of external contributions, is really significant. So, firstly, thank you, and thank you for obviously involving me and others in that. I guess the stepping it back for a moment, the danger post the recent energy crisis is that there's a real sense that kind of the worst is over, that we're now in a world where kind of prices are falling back, there's less emergency support in place, politicians can focus on other issues like getting elected, or alternatively some of the big political debates that are happening more generally. And I think this report is effectively trying to avoid that being the case. There is a kind of a more immediate question and challenge around fuel poverty, but there is also still a very significant long-term challenge around how we deal with it as a society. And that is a challenge that, whilst you may think we've got through the immediate crisis, is a challenge that is ever as pressing as it was previously. And I think the kind of numbers in the report tell you that. Effectively, there's a real risk of a lost decade over the 2020s, where you could still have broadly the same number of people in fuel poverty in 2030 as you have now, and equally a number that is broadly unchanged over the course of the last decade. And that clearly creates real challenges around both the delivery of statutory targets, but also, more importantly, the ability for the net zero transition to be a part of actually improving people's lives and making society fairer. If you look at the kind of numbers that are in the report, people could be in fuel poverty paying £500 a year more on their bills than they should otherwise have been if that target had been delivered. And that's kind of 50% of the kind of average long-term energy bill. So the kind of scale of cost that people are incurring that could be avoided is significant. And I think I really like the fact that for the first time, at least from what I've seen, you put a number on the kind of gap between stated political ambition and the fuel poverty targets of 2030 and what the kind of funding gap is to meet that target. Because actually we talk a lot about conceptual targets, our ability to deliver against them, but making clear that we are a long way away from that. And we've just recently spent, I think, upwards of 40 billion on bailing consumers out of the recent energy crisis. We're talking about a number that's half of that to solve this problem. So it's not insolvable. It's not something that we haven't done before. So I think that kind of number really helps to bring it home. But the one, before I just talk a little bit very briefly just around kind of thoughts on the report, I think it's important to reflect on this report and the work that's being done in the wider context. We're now heading into a period where we're going to need to accelerate the energy transition. The political debate around that is happening, and the Labour Party in particular are talking about the need to accelerate. And as part of that, we are going to see energy prices continue to be under pressure. We're going to see a huge amount of investment in the energy sector that will create new fixed costs and a new argument around how those costs are allocated, and a continual conversation around affordability and how we ensure that the costs are passed through in a fair way. So in some ways, I like to see the debate and the important conversation we're having today around fuel poverty within that context. We can't just have a contextual conversation around how we deal with fuel poverty. We need to have a conversation about how we deliver the net zero transition in a demonstrably fair way and try and ensure that the outcomes we're seeking ensure that actually the value of that transition, and particularly the provision of low carbon power, actually ensures that people who need the support get it, and affordability is kind of at the heart of that. And so you get into interesting conversations around the future of the retail market, the need for a social tariff, something I know the report touches on, as well as obviously broader questions around the allocation of policy costs in a net zero world, as well as obviously ultimately the way that kind of consumers should value low carbon products and how we prioritize those on risk of fuel poverty for getting low carbon products that actually can make a difference in their homes, but also in the way that they operate and manage their energy bills. So I think there's a real opportunity there. And I think the more we can try and connect this conversation on fuel poverty to that broader net zero transition, the better. Finally, just on the kind of recommendations, I think they're really positive. They reflect my experience in government. I spent a long time kind of dealing with these issues. A couple of thoughts. Firstly, coordination is clearly key. No one department and no one bit of government or kind of external regulatory environment owns the problem. We know things and measures work. We've seen that in the recent past, and where certain actual schemes can make a difference, they tend to be owned by different departments with different departments feeding in. Part of that is data sharing as well. It's not just about kind of civil servants and officials working together. It's more about sharing data from other sources like the DWP into the way that we run and operate our energy systems. That's really important. I think the report catches that well. The other thing that it does in terms of the recommendations is talk about the balance of measures. Yes, it has a big headline target around we need it to deploy potentially £18 billion worth of funding, but it does also talk about how that can be done in a way which isn't just public funding. We know how difficult the public finances position is at the moment, and the opportunity to use regulation, use other levers to try and ensure that a lot of that is private capital is really positive, and looks to try and then create a balanced solution building towards that target. And the final thing I would just pause on is that exact point around leveraging private capital. I don't think we can rely on any government, however ambitious they are on fuel poverty, to deliver that scale of funding. We're going to need to rest on private capital alongside an increase, as you say, of public capital. And the report talks about the opportunities to invest multiple billions in, for example, the private rented sector, which is a really good potential development that can make it go a long way. But obviously, landlords themselves are under pressure, so we need to think about the balance to how we do that in a fair and coherent way. And critically, obviously, we are now talking about potential change in the way we govern the energy system. Labour are talking about the introduction of a new UK-orientated kind of energy champion in GB Energy. These conversations around how we use those public levers to drive more private investment are just starting. And for me, apart from the upstream conversation on low carbon energy infrastructure, the role of entities like GB Energy in starting to deal with that fuel poverty challenge and really starting to accelerate action over the latter end of this decade is an important conversation, and one that is just starting. So thanks again for the report. I think it's really great. Keen to get into kind of any questions, but it's worth a read, and it's also worth taking into account the numbers that are a really useful addition to this year's monitor. Back to you, Peter.
Brilliant, Josh. Thank you so much for bringing in lots of different strands. And you're right, it's important to think outside of our particular box when we're trying to join it all up. Donald, I'm going to turn to you now to get your reflections on either GemServe's analysis or our report and our conclusions. Over to you.
Thanks, Peter. And yeah, just slightly gutted to go second, or rather not gutted, because I agree with very much of what the previous chap said. So yeah, obviously this is a hugely welcome contribution to understanding the required scale of investment and really moving that conversation on into real tangible policy goals things that we need to do and really be getting on with a vanishingly small and narrowing window of opportunity for action, really, with the government's own fuel poverty targets, with the net zero targets. We really do have to start getting on with this stuff and actually committing funding, regulation and policy which is commensurate with the scale of that challenge. So, I think this is a hugely welcome contribution to that discussion at a very kind of apposite time, really, with, various elections coming, the year of the mega elections, really, isn't it? Certainly in the UK, that is the case. There's a likely change of government afoot, so, real opportunity space for having these conversations. Yeah, I mean, it's really echoing things that have already been said, but obviously the scale of existing funding currently committed, showing how inadequate that is. I think there's also a real important point, which is obviously not in the report because it's not what it was there to do, but the design and implementation of current government fuel poverty funding, energy efficiency grant funding is not delivering. We have increasingly reduced levels of delivery in our main programs. We have a very short-termist culture in how fuel poverty funding is delivered, and I think that really does need a shake-up in a way that works with the grain of what we have now, and I think that's a real task for government, the next government as it comes in. I mean, point was already made that that 20 billion cost sounds like an awful lot, but actually it's less than half of what we spent in 22 and 23 just on propping up energy prices. So the money is there if we choose to commit it, especially as energy efficiency is well known as one of the bigger creators of local economic growth and local economic prosperity, because it creates jobs and investment throughout in places where the work is happening, through builds, merchants, people's wages, even the CAF down the road, it all helps. So just really emphasize the importance of government seeing this as an infrastructure challenge and investment in our future. Just a couple of points that I'll try and make, which are hopefully somewhat additional. So it's really interesting to see, that 5 billion of energy benefits. Obviously, they will continue through time. Many of the measures are very long lived, particularly energy efficiency fabric measures. So they will stand the test of time and keep delivering benefits as we go forward into the rest of the century. So investment, the sooner the better, really, with some of those benefits. On the sort of 28 billion of non-energy benefits, so obviously many of those are in health and other kind of core areas that are government responsibility or government has an interest in. So I think there's a challenge in socializing some of those benefits across the government departments that are responsible. We've talked a lot about health over the years in this space. How do we actually start to have a proper cross-departmental conversation about these co-benefits in a way that we can actually start to sort of budget them in how government thinks about how it spends money and where it saves money? I don't think we've achieved that yet, sort of as a sector and as a conversation with government. The role of landlords is really important. I recognise the points made that some landlords are not necessarily flush with cash, but clearly I think a minimum standards approach, which as was in consultation with government, has to be the way to go, I think, and has to be an ambitious route really to achieve change. So I think we can't step away from that. That being such a clear win-win, really, and cost caps and all the rest of it to keep those costs reasonable. But clearly, you should not be able to let out a property which is of a low standard. And the current enforcement of things like MEES at EPCC is showing that we need more resource and more attention paid. Again, just echoing what was said, but I think we need to start to see heat decarbonisation as a kindred spirit to fuel poverty elimination. Heat pumps, certainly in social housing discourses, are still presented as an extra cost. That does not have to be true. If you run heat pumps in an efficient way, if you run them on things like time of use tariffs, and you're able to valorise some of that benefit, particularly if you do things like take public policy costs away from electricity and make electricity less expensive, heat decarbonisation can actually be a way of supporting the reduction of fuel poverty. So I think that should be a real core focus of the next government as well, is how can we make heat decarbonisation affordable for people on low incomes and actually support people on low incomes to adopt these technologies through grants. So there's the sort of other side of the funding coin around how we support the adoption of heat pumps at scale. And I think the low income households should be first to receive that money, rather than it being sort of spent willy-nilly on those with the fastest finger as it is at the moment. So yeah, just really supportive of this work. Really think we should look to feed in these numbers to our wider conversations with government that we're having across our various organisations and efforts. And yeah, just well done to the team. Well done to GemServe.
And thank you again, Donald. That's fantastic, and I think you can see why we've asked both Donald and Josh to share their insight. There's a huge amount there. Look, we're going to quickly turn to some questions that have been coming in as we've been presenting to you. I think just to take them in some buckets. The first is about the private rented sector. So I think there was a question asking Anna what benefits you've modelled in terms of to landlords of meeting the target. Over to you, if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts on that. And I think that will also reach into how some of this might be paid for without increasing rents for poorer tenants.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so the landlord benefits that we've quantified will be the increased capital value to properties, private rental properties, and then also potentially bill savings where those flow through to landlords. Beyond that, we haven't quantified other metrics, but I know NEA are aware of multiple other sort of incentives or impacts that would have that would benefit landlords.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. I'll let you come in. It's worth saying, isn't it, that in the report, although we haven't modelled all or monetised all of the benefits in GemServe's work, there is a broader piece within the full report looking to identify all the range of benefits that come with tackling fuel poverty. Over to you.
Thanks, Peter. So yeah, just to say, we in the report, we don't just talk about the capital value of the property increasing. We talk a bit about the impact that actually has on landlords and their mortgage costs. So I've just changed your loan to value calculation, and therefore allows you different access to mortgages. There's also reductions in property maintenance, both in the cost and also the hassle. So warmer homes mean less damp in homes, and therefore hopefully easier times for landlords from that respect. Warmer homes or easier to heat homes also means more prosperous tenants. So tenants should be much more able to afford their rent. So reductions in rent arrears, but also void periods, it'll make them easier to rent out. We discussed the reductions in administrative or legal costs associated with being a landlord, as well as a result of having tenants that are more able to pay, and improved landlord-tenant relationships and reputational gains. So very difficult to monetize that one, but our discussions with organisations such as the National Residential Landlords Association have shown us that that is quite an important thing. Another thing I should say is that I think I said it in my piece earlier, but we're not expecting landlords to pick up all of the costs. We model that the landlords would have to pay some of the costs, and the rest would be picked up by government. And there's lots of different ways that could be done through grants or tax exemptions, etc. I had one more thing I was going to say, but I might have forgotten it. No, I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Matt. No, I think that was a pretty comprehensive response. Thank you to you both. Hopefully, just in general, this will be a wake-up call to the governments to reconsider the policy decisions that were taken last year to disappointingly not move ahead with the minimum energy efficiency standards, but to buttress those efforts alongside incentives for the good landlords that move quickly. But we've got quite a few questions which are asking about whether or not we've quantified the savings to the health sector or social care as a result of these energy efficiency improvements. Matt, without throwing you under the bus, do you want to take this one? I guess there were sort of limitations to what we could sensibly do in the time that we had, but over to you.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So again, in the report, we don't model, we don't quantify those benefits, although others have attempted to quantify sort of those benefits over a larger number of households. If you decarbonise more households previously, I think it's quantified 1.4 billion as the sort of cost of the NHS of cold homes, for example. We do talk about it in the report though, and it is a really important benefit that does need to be captured at some point. It is crucial, as I said, that sort of cross-departmental strategies include health, because there is a very, very strong link between fuel poverty and health, as evidenced by NEA's upcoming work, which we're doing a lot of operational work that's sort of working alongside the health sector coming up. So yes, it's very much important, but we just on this occasion we just couldn't quantify it.
And Peter, if you mind just coming on that, it's Josh. I completely agree, and there is actually, you may have spotted, government has set out this week a little bit of detail around how they're going to change some of the things that pharmacists can do to try and take a bit more pressure off the core bit of the NHS. So there's a good example to the point around coordination that government is starting to realise the opportunity to try and better coordinate and think about the shared costs and risks that different services provide. So it's a real opportune moment to be talking about that link and potentially the role that the kind of health service can have in ensuring that we're unlocking that value in the context of fuel poverty. So it's a really important point, but I think that message is finally starting to land on the government side.
If I can just make a brief comment there. So in our quantification of the air quality damage costs, so we've used the standard government approach to the value of that, and that does include health benefits of the changes to pollutants. So that is an aspect where health benefits or impacts are included so far.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna, and thanks, Josh. I think the other basic questions we're being asked are, will the report be circulated afterwards? All the links are on our website at 5 o'clock. You'll also see there a press release which we launched earlier this week, sitting alongside our own comments about our research. We've also got first responses from the chair of the Energy Select Committee, Angus McNeill, and also the chair, Caroline Flint, of the Committee on Fuel Poverty. Both are very supportive of the piece of work that we've undertaken and underline the crucial opportunity that we have now to move ahead quickly with realising some of these benefits on behalf of the poorest people in our society. I think I think we're running close to time, so I would just ask if anybody's got any final reflections or something that they haven't been able to comment on so far, for my colleagues on the panel to indicate if that's the case. Yeah, Donald.
Nothing more to say, really. Just well done all, and whatever support you need in helping getting this message out there. I think at this stage in the political cycle, we just need to all pull together, really, to sing from the same hymn sheet. Our sector's not always been the best at that. So yeah, I think it's about forming a coalition where we can, and getting some of these policy changes over the line that we desperately need. So yeah, just well done, and thanks for all the hard work, really.
Thanks very much, Donald.
I agree. I just a final word from me as well, Peter. I agree with Donald completely. I think there is a real danger, I said at the beginning, that the political cycle, as we move away from the winter and we get into the summer and the kind of prices do come down, that the issue around affordability, the combination of bad debt, and also then the issues around fuel poverty get forgotten in the context of that electoral process. So the more that we can come together to try and make that point, we want both main parties, to be coming forward with coherent plans on fuel poverty, and we also want the big debate to happen around what actually needs to happen post the election in that context. So it's a really important moment. Manifestos are being developed. The more we can do to coordinate on that and keep the issue on the top of people's minds, the better.
Thank you, Josh. That's a useful prompt. And there might be a prospect of an election in November, and that might equally focus minds a little bit on the importance of keeping people warm and well in their homes. Matt or Anna, do you have any final reflections before we look to close this session?
I'm going to be reiterating what others have said, is that hopefully this report gives a really high level view as to what we think needs to be done to get to those fuel poverty targets, but also the benefit, the reason that we're doing it, and give everyone that impetus to go forward. I know from the questions, there's lots of questions about the fine details of exactly how schemes can be put together and exactly how minimum energy efficiency standards could work. Those are important. You will see more from us on that in the future. But this report, I hope, gives people that impetus and drive to come together around what Josh has been saying and make sure the parties do have that clear plan in manifestos before a very important election.
Perfect. Any final reflections from you, Anna?
Not much to add from me. I think just to say it's been great to work on this project with you all, and yeah, glad to be feeding into this this case.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you all. We will be hopefully continuing our work with GemServe, Josh, Donald, and others, including many of you on this call to strengthen the arguments and enhance them as we approach that election, to make sure that it's unmissable and that the plight of low-income and vulnerable consumers is high up their priority list, but also the huge benefits that could be achieved if we do work together collaboratively. If we haven't got to your questions, then we will follow up, as I've said, and please do check out the full report on our website, including links to our press release, because that does pressy the analysis and the report in a helpful way, we hope. So thank you very much for joining us, particularly for those of you that don't know us, and if you would like to find out more, please do get in touch and we'll circulate some details for you to be able to do just that. Thanks again, and we hope the report will be of use to you.